Constructive Criticism is sponsored by Oasis Games. MTGOasis.com is the place to get cards for your next Magic event. Try them out with code CCMTG for 15% off of your first order, and use the code WouldThatBeGood for 4% off of every order. Want to support the show directly? Head on over to patreon.com/CCMTG to check out some awesome benefits and future goals for the show. Thanks for listening, and here's this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructed Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructedCriticism.com.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 392nd episode of Constructed Criticism. I am your always ready to go host, Mason, joined by my two always ready to go co-hosts, which was not a tongue twister at all, Spencer and Abe. Spencer, how you doing? You're back.
I'm back. I'm doing good. Abe, I feel like he should introduce me as producer and you as co-host.
Do you feel that way?
Just so it doesn't get confusing.
But you're a co-host.
I mean, I'm both.
That's just confusing. That feels like you're roping your chair.
What does roping your chair mean?
You ever been on a movie set and someone doesn't want anyone else to sit in their chair, so they rope the chair?
Oh.
Even a big movie star like me, you know, I'm in other people coming out soon. So, yeah, the game's changed me. I can't lie.
That's funny.
I know it's funny because Spencer said it's funny and didn't laugh. That's the classic way you know something's funny. Am I right, Abe?
Yeah, just like I think it's funny that you had to fight a real urge to go to the polar opposite of Always Ready host, despite Always Ready being quite a good thing to be. I feel like if that's your instinct, Mason, just a little note on air. Maybe you should lead with a more self-deprecating...
Why can't we build everyone up? We don't have to take me down to build y'all up.
Why does it feel like it's your instinct to take everyone down?
It's not my instinct to take everyone down. It's just to do the opposite of the thing.
Oh, just everyone else down. All right.
No, whoa, let's relax. Let's relax. There you go. Let's move on to that. That is the main purpose of the show. We're going to be talking about how to win a 1K here in just a little bit. But first, we need to do hashtag always improving. It is the point of the show. And my notes say it's Abe's turn. So, Abe.
I had kind of a little content moment where I have been been dragged into being a little more seriously involved in playing Final Fantasy XIV, and in that involves doing high-end raid content, apparently. And so I've kind of had to learn that from the ground up, and really just going in and diving in not only on, just thinking about different kinds of optimization problems, looking out into content to find, the right things, like how you felt when you were playing Guilty Gear a while ago. I know you talked about that, but just, finding the right content for, what I'm looking for, and thinking about how that can... how the presence of that content makes me think about what I need to be doing or what I should be doing for Magic.
Oh, I just have a note on Abe's. Just I think it's really interesting the way that the three of us and some of our friends think about content. Because obviously, I think a few weeks ago I showed the podcast listeners kind of I've got a tab for Halo, I've got a tab for Smash, I got a tab for Magic on my bookmarks bar to find the content that I'm looking for a given thing, whether it's a Smash character, whether it's a deck that I'm learning at the time in Magic, or whether it's learning the basics of playing Halo and stuff like that. I think that we might be a little bit different in looking at kind of in Guilty Gear, for example, Mason, you said it was actually kind of hard to find the type of content you were looking for, right?
Yeah, it really was.
And it's I wonder why that is, because I know a lot of people with the mindset that we have, and I wonder if the content is only good at certain levels for a certain amount of time, and then they're looking for something else kind of problem. But it's interesting.
I've really been in the market of looking for this kind of content because I'm leveling up beyond just being someone who I just play this MMO casually, like to do the things I like to do, enjoy the game. And the story or whatever kind of is just how I've been playing it. So changing that kind of led me down a path of now I've joined several discords on finding the best in slot stuff and where I need to go to do that, or what I should be practicing as far as my opening rotation. All these things are things you never would think about, and I'd never really thought about playing the game up until doing something more difficult. So I think it might just be a thing where a lot of people, especially when it comes to gaming, they're not necessarily they don't have to be taking it super seriously, right? There's tons of kitchen table Magic players who feel the same way. There's like no content for somewhere between like learn how to play the cards and build a commander deck or play a tournament, but the large valley of experience between there.
Best in slot is actually a really interesting thing to think about when you compare kind of what you were doing to your analog to Magic. I was tuning a Nihilist that for Standard. Matt Kling, former host of the show, was looking for something fun to kind of play for our Wednesday night Standard event at Oasis Games. Shout out. And one of the things that he found was a list that 5-0'd a league that was kind of like this Goldspan Dragon Showdown of the Scalds deck. And I was like, well, you don't have to do a lot to convince Spencer to play Showdown. So, but I kind of tuned that list and just kind of started crushing with it. It was really surprising the game that it had. We were going to record a video, but Matt didn't want to fork out the money to buy the deck on his account because he was like pretty convinced that it was favored against blue-black, and I was pretty convinced that it's not. We actually jumped online with me, I think, Saturday, and played a bunch of games with me as well, and we got to like talking about the changes that I made to the list and things that I haven't gotten to do with, you know, my friends in a long time. Kind of Matt and Quentin getting back into Magic has been really helpful for me as far as like getting instant feedback from people that I trust that are close to me that, you know, have Pro Tour experience. It was really nice. If you want to see the deck list and kind of where I've ended up, it is in the Patreon Discord, but I think that the deck is actually quite strong, and I'm excited to see what Neon Dynasty gives it.
It's always great to see the kind of late game, end game Standard decks pop up, you know, late stage Capitalism, late stage Standard.
Matt had a hot take that I'll just kind of share on the podcast that he doesn't even know that blue-red is even playable right now in Standard, just because like people are so tuned to beat it. And he and I are pretty both set on mono green actually just being the best deck in Standard right now.
I don't know enough about the Standard format to know. It doesn't sound unrealistic.
People have given up on this one, and I'm not sure why. It's a really fun format that is kind of like rotating, like a rotating door. It's kind of what I like in Standard formats where like different decks are good at different times. It's like a very Brad Nelson format, if you guys kind of get what I'm saying there.
Any alchemy news, Mason? You got any?
Changes are coming after this weekend, they said, because of the tournament this weekend.
I did see that list in the Discord and thought it looked really cool. It was a thing where I was like, if there was something to play, if only, I would have definitely fired it up.
My always improving moment comes from this past weekend. I was talking about Yawgmoth versus Blue-White with somebody. Well, technically we started talking about Blue-White v Yawgmoth, and she mentioned how the matchup was really hard for her, and I because she plays Blue-White, and I thought it would be really hard for me on Yawgmoth, because I assumed that despite being able to pressure in sort of weird ways with like Undying creatures needing Prismatic Ending and Grist taxing that as well, or calling into a Yawgmoth type situation where like Cord, you counter it, and then I play Yawgmoth and I combo you. I thought while those things were prevalent, I thought that the blue-white deck would actually be able to break up the individual points a lot more efficiently than I thought. And so in my head, I kind of did the classic oversimplification of the matchup, I think. You know, you have this answer here, this answer there, and like we're kind of curving out perfectly, and failed to account for the classic problem of Magic, and fell into the trap really that like, you know, games don't actually play out that way almost ever. That's actually a very small subset of our games where we have our best draws, and we more often have these disjointed draws, and we need to kind of make things come together, and especially for a deck like Yawgmoth. And so I got to play some of that matchup. I won the match, but the match was very close that we played, and it was very revealing where it's like, oh wow, like if I did not have this Grist on actual 2, and she didn't miss her land drop on like this actual turn, like I very easily lose the game if either of those things swing, or if not lose, the game is much, much closer than it was. And it was like down to like insects needing to be wrathed multiple times and stuff like that. And I just failed to do a good job of actually expanding how the game would play out in my head, which is something that we talked about last week. But also, I failed to really think about how, in the game I was able to do it, but outside the game, I didn't do a good job thinking about how I can pressure the blue-white players in various ways with things like, if I have a couple ignoble hierarchs, I don't even need to put anything else on the board, and I get to like threaten this Chord of Calling in response, right? It's like any sort of wrath. And so now it's like, okay, I'm hitting you for 3, you have to answer these ignobles in some way, and your Prismatic Endings are so taxed in that matchup that's not like it's almost never an exchangeable, favorable exchange. So that was my always improving moment, kind of getting in there and challenging my thoughts in the arena of ideas and coming out pretty happy about it all, you know. And I feel the match was much worse than I thought it was before.
I found two things really interesting in what you just said. The first was kind of something that I think that control decks and ramp decks taught me really well. You're not going to have your best draw all the time. How do you put together a mishmash of like multiple types of good draws to come to the point where you win the game? When thinking that, you also talked about kind of like learning about the matchup through a win. I wonder at what point in everyone's Magic career they start to get better at this. Like, what is the curve in which you stop saying, well, I'm winning the matchup, so it must be good, to actually talking to yourself or talking to your friends about what actually is happening in the matchup? Because I know for me, I think it took a while to kind of like go beyond just, I'm winning this matchup, thus it must be good, to what you did.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard. You have to kind of get to a point where you can trust yourself and be able to, like, no, that's hard to think about matchups critically, but you do have to consider a lot of things and kind of find the truth of the matchup, you know what I mean? And like what actually matters. And so I think it is probably harder than it seems at first glance, since obviously a lot of people don't do it at first, myself included. So yeah, I don't know. It is an interesting thing. I'm curious to probably think about that a bunch this week.
It's hard always to think between the results that you're seeing and the feedback you're getting, and then also being willing to like analyze. Like you were saying, like if you didn't have grist on turn 2, or if your opponent didn't miss their land drop on like a pivotal turn, the entire game changes. And I think it's kind of a thing where looking at those things is really important. You know, which kind of draw you have. Knowing to look at that instead of like thinking of all the ways it could have gone wrong instead of all the ways it did go right, or vice versa, all the ways it could have gone right but it went wrong, is really where we start to get into that.
If you go back to like the Guilty Gear example or the Final Fantasy 14 example, right? What Mason is actually looking for is to be able to ask the 3 whys or the 5 whys or whatever around why things are happening for him in Guilty Gear. And the same thing is happening for you in Final Fantasy, where you're like, why is this gear best in slot? Like, what can we have a discussion about it so that I understand versus the thing that I'm thinking or whatever. And like you have to do that in Magic too, where why is it important to go 1-drop into Grist? If you're not asking those questions and you're just going off the results, you're missing more than half of it, in all honesty, right? I think that everybody should learn from what Mason just said, because I think what you said was really hard for a lot of people, but you also did it in a way that was really clear and concise. So,
Spencer, is there any housekeeping we need to do before we move on to the main topic today?
So I believe, there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about really quick. When you're hearing this episode, it could already be up, but I'll be setting up in Melee this week, the tournament, and I think that we decided this one was going to be Alchemy. Is that correct, Mason?
Yes.
So we were going to do Alchemy after Neon Dynasty released. And then just a quick reminder, we are giving a lot of Oasis Store credit to those whose YouTube comments are picked at the end of the show, as well as the Patreon questions. It doesn't have to be a question on the YouTube comment either. I think that we kind of made it sound like it did. But like, if you leave a sweet YouTube comment, I'll read it on the show. Leave a comment. It's really helpful for the show. Tell us what you think about the show. I know that I left a comment 2 weeks ago on YouTube, and I didn't get to say it to Abe, so I'll say it on the show. But like, man, I really loved your setup on the show when you were in another room. I thought it looked great.
Oh yeah, we put a lot of time in making sure it looked nice too. That was down to keeping the cat ears on the headphones I was using. It was pristine.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. But yeah, leave a YouTube comment, and then the event should come. I should be posted. I got to look at dates and stuff and check with my wife. But yeah, the event's happening. I've talked to Oasis. Just a quick reminder, $500 in store credit to Oasis is already guaranteed, and then the prizes will go up depending on the number of entrants.
Well, let's move on to our main topic today. We're going to talk about winning your local 1K. And Spencer, this idea was kind of your topic and something you really wanted to talk about. So can you kind of break down like what sparked this sort of topic, and then, kind of set us up into it so we can get into the nitty gritty?
There comes a point in every young Magic player's life where they want more from themselves. They want more than just boosties at the end of the event, and they want some cold hard cash. And one of the best ways to get that cold hard cash is to play in local level cash events. And I'm curious, before we get too far into this, Abe and Mason, do you guys have 1Ks or 1K pluses or 5Ks near you outside of the SEGs?
Not really. There's Knoxville's like 3 hours from me, and they have a 2K to a 5K depending on the format every month. They have one of
cool.
those, a 6-hour round trip, and they have it on Sundays. So I don't make them out to that too much. Yeah, if it was Saturdays, it'd be snap it off. I got a day to rest. And I've done a bunch of stuff like that with the SCG IQs. They're essentially 1Ks.
Level Up Games near me, but it's pretty good. The entry's good. There's also some store in Pennsylvania that recently ran like a free 3K or something. You just had to like sign up because they were trying to like advertise for. There's like a bunch of different things, like a game they were advertising and like the different stores and stuff to like just get people in the room. I've been getting my hands into my piece of the pie for sure in some 1Ks.
Once kind of GPTs disappeared and PPTQs disappeared for at least for me locally, and one of the reasons that this topic came up is, Spencer, I know that you a few years ago were playing all of the 1Ks. After removal of a lot of these local events supported by Wizards, our stores started doing 1Ks and 2Ks to kind of support the local Magic scene. I haven't been having success. It was the one listener specifically, I had a long conversation about it, and it really sparked this topic of like, is there something different that you're doing for a local 1K, different than what you might do at an FNM or on your arena ladder run? Because I think it is actually substantially different, for example, than your arena ladder run, and I think it is substantially different than something like your local FNM. What makes it different? And I kind of want to cover those things.
Yeah, sure. So you make about $1,000 if you win.
No.
Compared to FNM. Oh, sorry, my bad. We'll skip that part. We'll skip that part of the show. Probably the best place to start is picking a deck, right? The tournament starts before the tournament starts, right? And X amount of players are eliminated before the first round even happens, thanks to deck selection and things of that nature. Starting things off, like playing something comfortable versus the best deck, it is a little bit of an interesting topic. It happens a lot. I'm sure if you've ever been to a Magic tournament or something like this, you've heard someone say like, oh yeah, Death Shadow is the best deck or whatever, but I just really feel comfortable with Hardened Scales. I feel like that's kind of where my, my bread and butter is. And I've played a lot of Hardened Scales, and so I'm just, I'm playing Hardened Scales today. And it's an awkward spot to be, right? Because if your main goal is to win the tournament, how much better are you going to be with a deck like, Shadow, which is maybe the best deck or perceived to be the best deck at that moment, versus something that is maybe worse, even significantly worse, but all the things and all the plans. It is an interesting kind of dynamic to be in.
Yeah, I actually feel like this problem, quote unquote, comes up a lot in Modern. Like, more than any other format I've ever seen. Legacy, even, it feels like people will, like, try to gather the cards they want for whatever they want to play. But for some reason, people just are going to jam their Modern deck. I mean, I won 1Ks with Scapeshift. It didn't take me long to move on from Scapeshift to Amulet Titan at my 1Ks when I thought that was a better deck choice. While you don't necessarily have to play the actual best deck, I think that you should not handicap yourself for no reason. You
kind of hit the nail on the head, right? Handicapping yourself for no reason is never a thing you want to do if your goal is to win, right? So if you're someone who plays, especially in a format like Modern's a format that's so broad and so many decks have so many good interactions with each other or whatever, there's so much to knowing a deck, or at least that's the way it feels in Modern, that if Grixis Shadow is the deck of the week, Rhinos is the deck of the week, but you feel good about your matchup against that deck with whatever you usually play, well, then you probably don't need to worry about it that much, right? It's more about making sure that you're comfortable when you pick a deck. At least for me, I always, kind of to a fault, have played decks that I'm comfortable with, even at the highest levels, over decks that were better on paper. I have a long history of playing Jeskai Control into fields of KCI instead of maybe taking the time to learn a lot about KCI and invest my time there. When I did things like that, it's because my motivation was I knew that beyond all of the KCI players or all these the good decks in the format, the best decks, I knew what my matchups were, I knew what my position was, and I knew that liked my chances in them. So if you're kind of caught between telling yourself you should change to the best deck because you think your deck is bad or because you're worried about some FOMO on playing a better deck. Because if it's just fear of missing out, that your deck might fail you, and you'll wish you played something better, well then that's just fear. If you really feel like you are comfortable with your deck, there's no reason you should feel like changing, in my opinion.
I think you both said a lot of it. I don't want to harp on it too much longer, but I do think, because this is such a persistent topic of conversation in Magic and thing, that I do want to weigh in on the idea that I normally tell people, which is be a reasonable deck gamer. as long as your deck is reasonable. If it's a deck that a lot of people are talking about and writing about and considering, it seems to be a strong presence in the metagame, it is probably not that bad of a pick, even if it's not the best pick for that weekend. And so not doing things that are over the moon, like I'm going to play Fiddle Bender combo, you know what I mean? And like something like that, where you're just kind of going off the rails. Like, I don't even know if you two know what Fiddle Bender is. It's the artifact pod.
Oh, okay. I know what you're talking
from
about.
From AFR. Yeah, it's a 2-mana 2/2 that's a pod of birthing pod, but for artifacts.
The next point on the show notes is literally what you just said, right? Is like, don't get too cute. I think a really good example of this is like, if you're to the point where you're like playing Firewalker main to try and like fix something, you might have gotten too cute. This is a 1K. I think be a reasonable deck gamer is like really good advice here, because it's not that hard to just like take a step back and look at your list. And if you showed this list to 10 people, would they say, dude, think of how bad these Firewalkers are going to be against KCI in this KCI. Like, what are you doing? Learning what it means to not be too cute for yourself. It's really important.
It's really important to get those kinds of sanity checks. Don't get too cute can also mean, like, if people are playing, like, just because you think a bunch of people are playing, like, Burn, doesn't mean you should show up with Soul Sisters. Don't trick yourself into thinking that you, like, know every matchup you're going to play just because you have an idea of what people are going to show up with.
Because it's modern and you don't.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
well, every format, right? Like, think about Standard too, though. Like, how many times have you been like, Teamer Energy is the best deck in the format, or whatever? It's like obviously the thing to beat. You go to your 1K or whatever, and there's like a Teamer Tower player and 2 blue-white players, and this person's on Constrictor. And sure, you play against someone on Teamer Energy, and you play someone on Teamer Energy in the top 8, but 4 of the 6 matches I just listed are not Teamer Energy. And that happens way more than people give it credit for. The thing that I think that people always assume and doesn't make sense is that they think no one else will ever consider playing other decks, and they will try to metagame, and they don't consider these other things. Like, well, as long as I can beat Teamer, it's fine. It's like, well, that's not true. You're at a local 1K where people think that they don't want to play these Teamer mirrors, they don't want to invest in it, they want to play this blue-white control deck and kind of pound these Teamer decks in the ground, so they think. And so now you got to be able to beat that sort of thing. And if your deck isn't able to do that sort of thing, you're just not going to succeed because you got too cute. And you tried to big brain tournament where if you just played a reasonable deck with a good game plan that had a coherent thoughts behind it, and you know what your deck's trying to do, you're going to get really far. Reasonable deck and kind of knowing what your plans are and what your role is and what you're trying to do in each matchup is a really powerful thing and gets underappreciated, especially at the 1K level, where if you just keep it a buck, realistically speaking, your 1K probably does not have a swath of great players. It's just not a realistic thing that happens. Having a strong deck with a good game plan that you know and it's reasonable is very, very good for these sort of events. That being said, I'm playing a win a case this weekend. I'll be playing Yawgmoth. Let's go!
I actually think that Yawg deck is a reasonable gamer deck for what it's worth. I think it's fine.
Yeah, I think it's on the fringe of reasonable gamer. Let's talk about making good mulligan choices, though, unlike the choices I'm making in my modern deck this weekend. And I think this is a huge part of Magic in general. It's funny, every one of these topics could or has been or will be an episode of CC. All 4 of these main points here. And making good mulligan decisions is one of the best ways to actually win a match of Magic, turn 0. And making good mulligan decisions, making bad mulligan decisions often make or break tournaments. If you mulligan better than your opponents, I don't have an exact number, but I imagine you win 15% more of your matches on average, at minimum. I don't know how y'all feel about that, but I feel like mulliganing is this huge skill that just gets under-talked about and underappreciated and is critical because it dictates how you play your games.
When you run back a game in your head, when you win or lose, usually when you lose, and you go, what could I have done differently? Ultimately, at the end of it, the thing you always could have done is mulligan. And whether or not that's right is a question, but it's such a powerful and big decision to make because of the fact that it influences everything else about the game you're about to play. If you keep a loose hand, you keep a loose one-lander that needs something to get there, or you mulligan too aggressively and wind up just without a hand that functions, both of those things are instant avenues to losing. You will just lose the game because of the decisions you make. Before anyone enters combat, before anyone plays a land, the game will be decided. A lot of the time what separates the people who are, among the best players that you'll see around you in a local scene and the people who, are still trying to fight their way up there is the consistency around making those kinds of good decisions and avoiding those big blunders, those big like match deciding decisions that are as simple as keepership. Like you said, we've done an entire episode on it, I think, in the last 6 months. Really, really great listen if this is something you want to make sure you study up on, because mulliganing is just the most powerful thing you can do.
Making disciplined mulligans is the biggest advantage you could possibly have at your local 1K or 3K or whatever. You need to know what hands you're supposed to keep and what hands you're supposed to mulligan. And like, if you're picking up a deck that maybe you don't have a lot of experience, drawing opening hands before the tournament and talking with people about them, like, is going to be a big help. Just go to 6. Like, it's basically free now. I think I posted this in the Discord that I was like undefeated on Molsta 5 with that Naya deck. It is so easier to mulligan now and know that you're going to like end up with a reasonable hand. A 5 is never good. A reasonable 5 is going to beat a bad 6 or a bad 7 a lot of the time.
You gotta get down to the 5s. We live in there.
Yeah, I've had a lot of good 5s with Hammer. I think that's just the mark of a good deck these days.
I have gone down to 5 way more since the London Mulligan, and it does not feel as bad as you think it would.
And honestly, we see this exacerbated in Modern, right? With things like Death Shadow and Murktide and Jund kind of all doing this, where they're DRC Ragavan decks, and they get to have hands that are like 2 lands, Ragavan or a DRC, 2 points of interaction. And then that is actually just so much better play than having like nothing on 1, Tarmogoyf K command, a couple lands, and like a Nihil Spellbomb or something. It's the world of difference. And even if you're down 2 cards in those sort of matchups, these 1-drops can like catch you back up. So think about how your deck tries to function and operate too. We used the Hardened Scale example earlier. That might be a deck that doesn't get to mulligan as strongly, but maybe that's a little telling about the Hardened Scales deck. The most fun part about Magic, when you get to talk to somebody who is new and getting into Magic, and you ask them about their sideboard plans, and they have one, and then they often tell you they don't, or they haven't really thought about it, or they're thinking about it. And if you're listening to this and that sounds like maybe you, it's okay, but I am going to ask you the question, listener. How many matches of Magic do you play sideboarded? Is it less, more, or equal to non-sideboarded? The answer is on average more. You always play at least 2 games in Magic, unless you're getting some deck reg errors, in which case work on that. But you're going to have to play at least 1 sideboard game in every one, and then you'll just have a bunch of game 3. So you're more often going to play more sideboarded games than any other game. So having a sideboard plan, coming prepared for that, and knowing your role in each matchup is super important. And let's kind of break that down. We've done a whole episode recently on preparing and sideboarding and how to build sideboard guides. So you're going to go check out that episode to get more in depth there. But let's talk a little bit about what your role in each matchup is and talking about that sort of thing, because I think that part of preparing is something we didn't talk a lot about on that past episode.
When you're trying to know your role in a matchup, one of the things that if you actually watch the video that Abe and I did where he's coaching me on Hammer Time, it was like one of the more interesting conversations is this a Thoughtseize matchup? And the reason that question is important is because it changes the dynamic of the way that the game is going to play out when you decide that you're a Thoughtseize deck in a given matchup. It means that you value the information quite a bit, and you also value the loss of a mana, in all honesty. When you think about like a deck like Hammer Time, losing that mana is actually a lot of mana. Abe can probably talk about this way better than I can, but it was really interesting to kind of have those conversations in understanding, is my role to need this information and to take a key card, or is my role to be the aggressor or to grind out? You can be both, right? You can want the information, have those things, but you have to decide what you value in the given matchup. And also, Abe and I had multiple times where the player of the draw was really important in making that decision.
I could bring in Thoughtseize against just about every deck in Modern. Thoughtseize is never a card that you're going to be upset to have in your deck. It's a really, really strong disruptive card, People are going to have cards that they're trying to use, and taking one's really good, but, in a deck like Hammer Time, all of your spells cost 1 or 2 mana, which means that the opportunity cost of casting a Thoughtseize is like a whole turn. It's a whole spell's worth of development. It's a whole Esper Sentinel. It's a whole Springleaf Drum. It's half of an Urza Saga token. It's a lot of mana and a lot of your time to use in a deck that's trying to set up this combo before or around turn 3 or 4. Lots of times we can fall into the trap of feeling like, oh, all of these cards are good against what my opponent's doing. Thinking of the times where the card could be good rather than the times other cards could be better, or what you want to actually do with your cards instead of just always thinking about all the upside or all the downside when it comes to your sideboard cards and how they play with your deck. It's all really linked together, thinking beforehand about what you envision the matchup playing out as, and what it is you want your deck to do, and how your cards can fit that function instead of just how can my cards interact with their cards is a huge part of making sure that you're sideboarding with a plan.
One of the huge things that has been a change in Magic recently, for example, to kind of talk about how your cards play out in a given matchup, you used to not board out mana dorks very often against control decks because they were usually 1 mana. Llanowar Elves or Birds of Paradise, they just gave you a quick mana advantage, and they were also net positive on mana if your opponent did decide to kill them, right? Because they were using something like Doomblade to do that. Now that your mana dorks are 2 mana, it actually is a huge tempo loss for you to play a mana dork and get it killed. That's something that Magic has evolved and changed, and understanding that even though the mana advantage is important against something like a control deck, that's no longer your role. Your role is to have hard-to-kill threats against the control deck, or threats that gain you an advantage when your opponent has to spend mana to kill them.
In a similar vein of the dynamic of things change and thinking about how those contexts change. It happens in matchup to matchup as well. If you take a deck like Blue-White Control in Modern, would anyone want to take any guess what its default position is? Blue-White Control, do you think it's the control or the aggressor? Curious. But there are matchups where it needs to be the aggressor and it needs to be jamming cards. And a great example of this is 4-color. 4-color is doing the same thing Blue-White is, except all its cards net a card more than Blue-White does. And it plays all the same cards almost, and the ones it doesn't play are better in the matchup than the ones that Blue-White plays. So it's just a matchup where your opponent's literally just you are not as good as them. And so that being the case, you need to jam your things that are actually able to win a game, like Teferi, like Jace the Mind Sculptor, and you need to be putting a clock on this game so that they cannot have the time they normally expect to against you. And that is a huge thing, and that's just an example of knowing your sideboard plan and knowing your role in the matchup and making your sideboard and sideboarding according to that, and not trying to fight these long drawn out battles you can never win. Instead, try to condense the game into a spot where you can win.
I think that when you look at something like Blue-White Control in Modern is a great example of understanding when I'm going to sideboard and I know that I'm actually supposed to be the quote-unquote aggressive deck. What I'm actually looking for is ways to use more of my mana throughout each turn and get the most out of my mana. Whereas sometimes when the control deck on the other side, I'm trying to not use my mana and play a reactive game. When Mason says jamming, he's talking you have the mana, you're going to use it now. You've got to get on the board, make plays. Find the spots where it goes against the grain, because those are the spots when you're understanding your role in making those sideboarding decisions that you're going to gain the biggest advantage.
For your local events, do you guys ever feel like you take into account kind of what the people who are going to be there are going to play? I don't know how big your 1Ks are, but I know recently I was playing a 2.5K locally. It was Modern, and the last one I played against the black, red, or Grixis decks 3 or 4 times over my 5 rounds. Well, I didn't know this before, but apparently a lot of people at the store like to play these decks, and so I leaned more into Sanctifying deck for this metagame because it was different than the online metagame I'd been playing against at the time, or even what I thought people would play or what I was prepared for from the week prior, which was more Solitude decks, whatever. Do you ever find that things like that you tap into more when it comes to your local events than, let's say, a Magic Online event or an arena event?
I'm preparing for the event I'm going to. Some players, I think, have this whole philosophy of well, you would never do that at a big event, so why are you doing it here or whatever? I'm not playing the big event, I'm playing the local event. So, for example, let's say your 1K is 60 people, right? And most of the people going there. And that Living End is not a thing. Maybe cut those cards in your sideboard there just for Living End. That's such a bad matchup or whatever. Unless you believe you can't lose anything except Living End, and maybe somebody could get the deck or whatever. This happened at the Store Championship thing recently, where when I played Grand Prix Vegas, I had the Emrakul the Promise into my sideboard, and it was very, very good. It won me multiple matches, and I needed it in certain spots. I knew no one else was going to be playing 4-color Money Pile. I knew we didn't have that many Blue-White Control players, and so I cut it and brought in a card like Veil of Summer, which is still reasonable in those sort of matchups, but has game in other spots where there are more of the black, red, and Grixis decks in my local store, and so I wanted to have more game for those decks. Picking your spots and picking your battles is super important. There's no reason to have 4 Chalice of the Voids in your sideboard when your main deck if everyone at the store is going to be playing tap-out Blue-White Control.
Yeah, I don't know the last time that I didn't play Burn in the first 3 rounds of one of my local 1Ks, as well as like a Tron deck being in the top 8. So like those are things that I definitely consider going into my 1Ks.
When it comes to winning a local event like that, and especially when it comes to building your sideboard right, because that's where you're really going to gain those reasonable extra points, right? I said when we were talking about picking a deck, like you don't want to just bring Solstice just because you think there's going to be some Burn players there, because you can't guarantee you'll play against them. But that doesn't mean you don't want to make sure, if you think there's a high chance in, you're winning in for top 8, your quarterfinals match, you're going to play against like one of the better players in your store who plays a lot of Burn, or you don't want to have a couple of extra hammers for a control matchup if the person who usually top 8s all of your local 1Ks is a control player. And so things like that I think are important to think about hedging towards your metagame more so than like getting too cute.
Either find specific hammers for stuff you know that's going to be super popular, like Abe just said there, with like, if you know all the best players at your store play blue, white, or Burn, for example, having something like Core Firewalker might be better than having something like Sanctify Impact. But also, if you think your store is very diverse and we're all over the place, maybe have more cards like EE than having cards like Stony Silence or something like that are more targeted.
I'm a huge fan of flexible sideboard cards. At my 1Ks, while what Abe is saying is true, like you're gonna know that like there's gonna be a Tron player in the top 8 in Utah. There's gonna be X number of people that like their friends had an extra Burn deck, so they came to the 1K to jam cards. If I'm gonna prepare for Burn, I would rather find something. Obstinate Baloth, for example, is a really good example of like, yeah, this card is a really great card against Burn, but also it's really good against Liliana or something, or whatever it is.
I haven't seen Liliana the Veil in a year. I miss her. I want her back.
Yeah, it's true. We got those Renin 6s now, so.
Yeah, Grandpa, keep talking about Liliana the Veil. Let's get back inside.
Like, as a good rule of thumb, if you're going to take a step towards preparing for one matchup really hard, you got to make sure that you're still covered in some way against the matchups that you're sacrificing those points against, right? Like, part of the good part about putting Thoughtseize in my Hammer sideboard is that I get to check off a bunch of matchups where I'm like, well, now I have a plan. My plan can be, I'll Thoughtseize them and combo them and hope that works out, instead of just being like, I have no plan at all and I can't find enough cards to commit to everything at once and still cover the matchups I'm worried about. Thinking about that trade-off and being cognizant of that when you build your sideboard, I think is make sure to want to get across here.
Finally, the last part is playing for the win. This one is really important for like to think about what your goals are too, right, for the tournament, right? Like if your goal is to go to the 1K, we've kind of been working on the assumption that your goal is to walk away there with some money and stuff like that. And it's to not be satisfied with just getting some amount of money. It's fun and great that your weekend, like you got to hang out on Saturday, play some Magic with the homies. It was free or whatever because you got top 8. But remember that it's important to like stay hungry and still want that top 4 split or that final split, right? Like it's about drive, it's about power, Spencer, am I right?
People get really mad at me when I won't split in one case. I'm usually the guy that says no in the top 8 split. I'm not here for that. I would like to take my wife out to a steak dinner and put some money in savings. That's just not why I'm here. I'm here to win. I'm here to challenge myself. It's okay to be the guy that wants, the equity. Do the math in your head. It is easily worth 30 minutes of your time to play the match if you think you're going to win. It's worth the experience, right? Like the number of 1Ks that we were having for a short amount of time where that's fine. I get it. You want your time back, but the hunger to be able to say I won $500 this weekend playing Magic, or I won $1,000 this weekend playing Magic. I think people have forgotten how good it feels to just be the winner. I think that it's important to have that mentality going into a 1K top 8, because if you don't have it and you're just looking for that shop, you're going to lose your edge. That's just what gaming is.
But I think part of it does matter too, what your goals and what your incentives are too, right? Like if you're a college student who doesn't have a good budget, splitting and getting your 150 or whatever is way better than losing and getting $50 back, or the possible 200 you're going to get, right, from not splitting. So that's what we talk about so much in the show. It's so important to know where you are, what your goals are, what your agenda is, and what you're trying to do in Magic and in life. And you have to know those sort of things so you can make choices like this.
I'd honestly prison rules every 1K if they'd let me. Prison rules is winner takes all. You get to the top 8, instead of chopping, you prison rules it. The first place gets everything.
I've never heard that expression for that, but that's awesome. At my local, I think it was the Forgotten Realms pre-release. It was the last round we're playing for winner gets 5 packs, loser gets 3 packs or something. It was do you want to just split 4-4? I was like, no, I want 8-0. What's the point, man? We're playing pre-release. Who cares?
I don't remember the last time that I didn't go to a PPTQ where it was loser gets all the prizes, winner gets the invite.
That's just the way it goes.
There's no invite on the line anymore, guys. Like, you gotta go for the throat.
Yeah, I think that is kind of, I think, where it comes from, though. You know, like, the amount of times I've split top 8 and just played it out for the invite, like, made it so that second place gets more, right? Those things exist because, you know, there's something else other than the monetary prize, and the like, equity for most people, the split in top 8 is so good. Like, on a 1K, you're not making more unless you're, like, losing the final. It feels so much safer. If you are someone who is really trying to take their game as high as it can go and get used to playing the most high-stakes matches as possible, like, Hayne talks about it a lot on Table for Two, and I think he might have brought it up during our episode with him.
Hayne is actually the one who did this for me. It was the first time that we had him on this podcast. I was like, what's the number one piece of advice you'd tell me to get better at Magic? He said, never split again.
Yeah, because he had this time before he qualified where he would lose the finals all the time, and he was like, I just have to stop splitting. I don't care if it's better, because I need to get better at playing under pressure in these spots. There is not a lot better feedback than knowing that you could have had $50 more or $100 more or whatever if you hadn't made that mistake, and getting used to that kind of pressure. Playing for that GP top 8 is going to feel a lot more stressful than playing for winning the 1K, but you'll have a frame of reference for what it feels like to be that kind of stressed and have that kind of investment in a match of Magic, and you can't really get it elsewhere. And so don't feel like this means you should always, like Mason said, be realistic with yourself and know your goals, but don't get complacent with feeling like, you know, oh, I'm just chopping top 8 and going home being enough. When you're in the top 8, you're playing with the 7 other best players that day, right? You're playing with the 7 people at the top of the standings and yourself. And so that's your best chance to play matches that are going to teach you things, to have the most you take out of them, or feel like they have the most stakes involved. So don't just give up on that.
That is going to wrap up our main topic here of playing to win your local 1K. Hopefully this was helpful. I mean, all of these sort of things are things that are or will be an episode of CC. So if any of those topics, picking a deck from making good mulligans to having a sideboarding plan to playing to win, were interesting and you wish you had heard more of them, congratulations. This entire episode was just to sell you on past episodes. Ha ha ha. Go back and listen to them. We're going to explore these topics more, and these are important things and they have to be thought about. And everything we talked about can be applied to any sort of tournament, but we framed it in more of this sort of context. So keep that in mind. If you want to support the show, you go to patreon.com/CCMTG to support the show. I think we have a Patreon question.
We do. Would you like me to read it?
I would love it.
Yes, it comes from Adrian. Shout out. What are your favorite cards in Cube? It can refer to Avengers Cube, Legacy Cube, Arena Cube, or whatever cubes y'all have played. Have you guys ever played Mono Blue Cube?
Nope.
That one's we have a Mono Blue Cube laying around at Oasis that's pretty fun. But I'm a 3 type of cube gamer. I'm either a fetch land gamer, a rampant growth gamer, or a Goblin Guide gamer in Cube. Those are my games. Those are my levels. I believe everything else is silly and wrong.
If you were not a coward Spencer, you would say wrong to us there.
I'm either casting Lotus Cobra or Rampant Growth, or I'm casting Goblin Guide, or I'm got literally 17 non-basics in my deck. That's how Cube works, guys.
I think it depends on the cube.
Also, Tango Wires should be banned in all cubes. Just throwing that out there.
That's just wrong.
Wrong.
That's just factually untrue.
That's hurtful.
I will say the cards I'm most excited to pack one, pick one, that aren't power, and even though I'm not really excited to take power, I just take it out of obligation, are Strip Mine in Vintage Cube, followed by like a Figure of Destiny, because I like to know I can go white or red. The thing about taking Figure, pack one, pick one is that you're still open. It's all there.
Okay. Sure you are.
I
love the idea that
you can be in white or you can be in red. As far
you
as
all ever
Arena
listen to
Cube,
the Married to Your Picks episodes?
Arena Cube, I'm pretty partial to the aggressive strategies, so I like a Chandra or a Hazaret there. You might notice a recurring theme, but in the right kind of
that
cubes,
you're a Goblin Guide gamer. Yeah, we did get that.
Yeah, but I do really like Soulfire Grandmaster, and I hate that it's only ever really supported alongside like Time Walk as this combo card, because it is my favorite card in Magic by a lot. And every time I get a chance to play with it, I do.
I'm a Tangle Wire gamer. I have taken and will take Tangle Wire over every piece of power. I have passed every Mox, every Black Lotus, every Time Walk, every Recall for a pack one, pick one Tangle Wire, knowing it would wheel steal. I like Tangle Wire. I like green and white cards. I'm very partial to like mana accelerants into angels or just like a bunch of big green dummies. But this weekend, I played a lot of Control Tubert. I got to play Drake's Tubert of Control, and I played a lot of Tubert Control this weekend. And so I have some new cards I'm partial to that are quite bad, so get ready.
You learn about Creeping Tar Pit?
I knew about the Tar Pit.
There's a lot to learn about Creeping Tar Pit. Creeping Tar Pit is messed up in that Tubert.
It is very, very good. I identified that one, but I was also kind of away from it a bunch of the times. I also got bodied by Nephalia's Drowner in that thing. Cycle Complicate is my favorite and only way to play Complicate, by the way.
I'm actually less into Cube than I'm into like Battle Box style gaming. 10 tap lands that you can play from at any time, and then like I just find those type of games more interesting than Cube.
I'll finish answering the question now. And then my other big card is Sensei's Divining Top.
I like when games slow down. I like a Tangle Wire, and I like a Sensei's Top.
Mason's like, I'm not here for a good time, I'm here for a long time.
I've got a lag switch in my deck. That's what I want to draft. I want as many loading screens and buffering issues as possible.
I was issued a permit by Joe Lissette to use Sensei's Divining Top at an efficient pace. I can play top at a quick pace.
Joe Lissette never used Sensei's Divining Top at an efficient pace ever! What are you talking about?
I never said my test proctor was
that
good.
That doesn't mean anything.
Thank you, Adrian, so much for the question. If you have an answer to the question, make sure to leave a YouTube comment. Let us know what your favorite Cube cards are and why Tangle Wire should be ripped into pieces.
Ever Emery a Tangle Wire, Spencer? Ever lived? Ever been alive?
I had a Tangle Wire face too, buddy. You'll get over it.
I will never. It's my favorite card.
It's not a phase.
It's not
a phase, Mom. It's a lifestyle.
I got the Codex Shredder and Control Tuber, by the way. That's a combo with Sensei's Divining Top. That's all I'm saying. That's a real clear the top of my decker. Buy it back too. Whew.
Change my answer. Whisper of the Muse is my favorite Cube card.
That's a sweet one. Whisper of the Muse is a sweet Cube card. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Constructed Criticism. If you want to listen to other shows like this, you want to check out the rest of the network, from Common Knowledge, which is a Popper podcast, got you all your things you need there. There's now a Popper Council. Our people were skipped over, and we will be running for the Popper Council in 2024, so keep your ears low to the ground there. You might want to check out Drafting Archetypes with Sam Black. Legitimately one of the best Magic the Gathering limited podcasts out there. To hear Sam Black's unique perspective on all 10 of the typical draft archetypes. And you get to hear the way Sam thinks about those sort of things, which is pivotal. You know, you listen to episodes of LR and Lords of Limited, you get a lot of stats and a lot of factors and a lot of different thought process, but Sam always looks at things in a very unique light, and having that sort of insight is incredibly, incredibly helpful. So make sure to check that out along with Homeward Path if you're a parent playing Magic. If you would like to maybe win some free store credit, make sure to go on over to youtube.com/constructedcriticism. Leave a comment. We're going to pick a comment, and everyone who gets picked for the show will be answered after the Patreon questions, a new thing we're kind of starting. You're going to get some store credit to Oasis Games. So Oasis Games, everything you need. I picked up 3 Urza Sagas today from Oasis Games, had them, boom, ready to go. Nice, cheap, efficient. And you can use our promo code that you heard at the beginning of the show in order to get 15% off your first order and 4% back on every single order. If someone wants to find you, Spencer, where can they go?
You can find me on Twitter at Spencer13H. You can find me on the Constructed Criticism YouTube channel and the He's a Game Media YouTube channel, as well as my podcast Need to Nerd at Need2NerdPod on Twitter.
Abe, where can people find you?
Twitter.com/moreknothings, and you can DM me there for coaching on Hammer Time, where I will teach you all things bonk.
And you can find me on twitter.com at Mason E. Clark. And you also made twitch.tv/the Mason Clark. Streaming pretty consistently Moderino there. From there, you can actually find everything social media wise. It's all kind of there. It's pretty great. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Constructed Criticism. We'll see you back here next week for another episode of CCMTG.